The rest of this talk we'll say what we're really interested in when we do folk linguistics is the discovery, right, of those B prime concepts, stereotypes, whatever they are, and their application to linguistic material. Now, I don't want to say for a minute that you always have to go down and pick up something about a hillbilly speaker or a badly educated speaker. I can say hillbilly because I am one. You can't. Don't say hillbilly around me. I'll be mad, right? And I'm also half Hungarian, so also don't call me a hunky, but I can say that too. Now, if you go down in there, you might have imbued a word for so long, right, that the word itself seems to take on the caricatures of an uneducated group and so forth. So we could skip some processes. So, how are we going to discover this stuff? How are we going to find out what these concepts are? Now, in some cases, I've introduced a procedure which I think has had a great deal of success, one in perceptual dialectology called draw a map. You just hand people a blank map of the territory and say to them, why don't you draw circles around places where people talk different? You can say differently if you've got a big thing for adverbs. You know, tell me how people talk in those areas. You know, what do they talk like? What do they sound like? Now, here's a nice map of a guy who was 18 years old. He was just on the verge of being a coach. He's from Chicago. This material was collected in 1984. And you can see he's got lots of interesting ideas. People in California are high-class partying slobs and have a stuck-up sound. That's kind of cute. He's from Chicago, and guess how you talk in Chicago? It's normal talk for the average person. But now here's a really amazing thing. It's normal talk for the average person in Chicago, but over in Detroit, where they sound just like they do in Chicago, it's black throw talk because there's a large percentage of black people in Detroit. There are some parts of Chicago that this young man has not been to. And some stuff that he just doesn't know about the ethnic composition of Chicago. I'm going to have to lay this on him sometime. And there's just some other wonderful things over here. One of my favorites is Jerseyite slang. And you can just hear the Chicago guy. He is so angry because he says they're always saying soda instead of pop. Everybody knows that pop's the right word for soft drink. Well, I'm from Louisville, and the right word for soft drink is soft drink, obviously, because we got your hard drinks and we got your soft drinks down in Louisville. And that's But the important thing that I want you to notice here is Southern talk, the worst English in America. Now, so when we first started doing this in the early 1980s, we had this motivation. We said we want to find out if people draw dialect maps which are like what dialectologists do. This was a really dumb enterprise because, of course, they're not going to respond to exactly the same things that scientists do. And what we realized, so we looked at more and more and more of these maps, people were not drawing maps of where people spoke differently. They were drawing maps of where they thought people spoke correctly and incorrectly. Now, let me show you why we're absolutely certain of this. Here's 147 of those maps, which have been computer generalized. That is, we took each one of these maps of the U.S., and every time somebody drew a boundary, we, I mean a graduate student, of course, took a light pen and traced that boundary onto a digitizing pad so that the pixels that were covered within that area were recovered by the computer. And then we could go back and say, well, where did 50% of the people draw an area? Where did 75% of the people draw an area? So this is a map which shows you above the 15% level where people drew areas where people spoke differently from the point of view of southeastern Michigan. Okay, so these are 147 southeastern Michigan respondents. Now, what's amazing about this is, I mean, you can see there's an Appalachia, there's a South, there's an East Coast, there's a kind of funny small Midwest, number 10. There's a Texas all by itself, just like there's a California all by itself. But here's the amazing part. Out of 147 people from Michigan, 138 drew a South. 94% of them. So for some reason, for some peculiar reason, which I have a lot of trouble figuring out, the South is enormously salient to people from Michigan. I don't really have a lot of trouble figuring it out, and you probably don't either, right? And the second most common area drops all the way down to 61%, and it's their area, right, where we're from.